So in these 25 minutes, I was asked to give a more like an introductory talk. So I will not give details of all of the work that I've done in this field, but rather what I would like to put forward is a vision of how I see the bridging of quantum science and biology, what challenges I see ahead, what I see as the current state of affairs, and how I think we might be able to move forward. And in doing so, I will mention some of the work that I've done in the past 10 years on understanding quantum effects in biomolecules. So just to begin with, I like to present a perspective of how I see possible unifying features or principles in biology that might help us to understand the possible role of quantum effects in biology. I like this picture that I took from, I adapted from, this is Alexander Kurakin. I don't know if he's well known or not in biology, but I find interesting his writing of how he understands the hierarchy of biological systems. And one of the possible conceptualizations that one might have is that we have different length and time scales of the different processes that are relevant for life happening at these different scales. But in each of these levels of organization, from the protein level to the society level, we can always identify networks in which these will be metastable networks, so they will stay in certain states for some time, but those states will definitely change, and it will change in a particular direction. And the links between the components of these networks will represent exchanges of energy, matter, and information. So I like this view because then when we identify the quantum domain of this biological hierarchy, which I like calling more the quantum classical domain, because these systems lie precisely at that interface. These are systems typically in the nanoscale and typically in the sub-picosecond. The time scales that we're interested are typically sub-picosecond. And in this time and length scale, there is still a unifying principle that might help us to draw relationships between these different hierarchies in biology. Now, I have to say, I'm a theoretical physicist, and all my work has been on quantum coherence in different settings. So forgive me if my view of these hierarchical levels of biology are too naive or too simplified, but I think they give us a view of how one might draw connections between these different levels. In each of these different levels, one can always think of the particular problem we are interested in terms of a system that we are interested in understanding and an environment. And this is common to all the levels in biology. We are always interested in understanding this particular system and the interactions that it has with whatever we call in each of these hierarchy of structures the environment. There are at least two aspects that I find interesting that are common to all those levels of organization. And it's the fact that whatever transformations are happening within what we call the system in interaction with this environment are transformations that occur out of equilibrium, slightly out of equilibrium, and they have two characteristics. They are always very directional. So for instance, a cell splits in two, but it never combines to form the original cell. The same with energy transfer. It goes from one position to another position, but not the other way around. So this directionality seems to be a particular aspect that is common to all those levels of organization. And in all those levels of organization, we see an interplay always between opposite processes: localization and cooperation, stochasticity and order, efficiency and regulation. So what I would like to show you is that these aspects that we can identify at all levels, we can see them again in the quantum domain. And therefore, from this perspective, we might start drawing unifying principles in all those levels and then understand the role of quantum within this framework. Now, the idea of understanding what is happening at these different levels, and in particular in the quantum domain, of course, we know it's not new. It started in just right at the beginning of the 19th century with the 20th century, sorry, with the beginning of quantum mechanics as well. And as John mentioned, there are different precursors of this understanding, two of which I mentioned here, Niels Bohr and Erwin Schrödinger. And in his preface, in the preface of his book, Erwin Schrödinger puts a question that one might think that is the question that we're still trying to answer. And he puts there the question at how we can explain the events that happen in space and time within the boundaries of a living organism, how we can explain this with physics and chemistry. What I like to argue is that things have changed significantly from there. And not only, we're not just anymore just a scientific assembly of just men, as you can see. Some women, not too many, but we are on the way. But also, we have now new experimental and theoretical techniques that have made significant progress in what is the question that we want to address here. We have had an exceptional progress in quantum science, and that exceptional progress will help us to move forward in this field. And therefore, we have redefined the questions of interest. So let me just point out 4 iconic experimental settings that I think are very relevant and that have changed this field significantly. Of course, the fact that we can access X-ray spectroscopy of the molecules that we know has been key. In the 80s, the fact that we can track in time what happens at this nanoscale. In the 2007, the fact that we now can not only track in time in one direction, but we can find correlations as we track in time, and this is what I will understand as optical multidimensional spectroscopy. And the fact that we can do so not just at the ensemble level, but at the single molecule level, which is the direction that I think we need to move forward. Now, from the quantum science perspective, we have had a transition from what we will call the first quantum revolution to the second quantum revolution. The first one based strongly on the fact that we understand quantization of energy and the duality of wave and particle. And that was enough to create a completely new information age, a completely new modern technologies. But most of this quantum mechanics was in terms of understanding and explain what already existed. So we understood the structure of the molecules, we understood the structure of the periodic table, but in this first quantum revolution, we were not able to create new atoms or manipulate all that quantum behavior, and this is what this second quantum revolution has moved on to. And it's the fact that we now understand there are some not typical and not classical phenomena that we will associate to quantum superpositions and coherence and correlations. We have a non-traditional role of the observer in these quantum systems, and by manipulating this, we will be able to produce either improved performance or completely new performances that cannot be achieved in the classical framework. And as you have heard, this might lead to new information communication and sensing technologies. All of this is based on the fact that we have now the ability of manipulate at the single molecule level or at the single atom level quantum superpositions. Now, what characterizes the move from this revolution of the systems that quantum scientists are interested in is that these are very controlled systems. These are an atom in a cavity, which I can control properly. These are systems that are at low temperature. But when we go to biology, we face with systems that are quite outside that regime. Yet the question is the same, and it's the question that these new experimental techniques and approach in quantum science has put forward, and is, can these biosystems be non-classical? Can these biosystems exhibit non-trivial quantum behavior? And with this question, what I would like to invite is for all of us to move from biology is quantum because it's based on molecules. No, we need to move forward from that statement that just simply the fact that we have molecules there, it is enough to say that biology is quantum. This question has already been transformed into a more specific one, and we are trying to understand precisely this. In essence, what I think is happening is that we are facing what, in terms of Kuhn, is a paradigm shift. And it's a paradigm shift in both in biology and in quantum science. So we have a conservative view, and I'm going to say we're just in that process. We are towards that because, of course, we're a community here that we are interested in this, and that somehow we have the belief that there is a challenge and an opportunity in understanding this. But outside this community, there is still a very conservative view. So things haven't changed that much as we would like to, because there is still that conservative view, which all the reason. That conservative view, I like to just summarize it here by this statement that appears in this paper by Longet and Higgins. Longet, he was a theoretical physicist also that worked in, I think he was a neuroscience. And in 1962, he was invited to give this talk about quantum biology and, quantum mechanics and biology. And he presents a view that I think is still very common in the scientific community, physical chemistry. And it's the fact that while quantum mechanics might explain the structure of these molecules, at the end of the day, the student of living matter will have much more need just to understand that, let's say, traditional physical chemistry than anything to do with quantum mechanics. So this is just to say that his view was essentially, yeah, it might be that certain small aspects there might need to quantum mechanics to be described, but at the end of the day, when it comes to the biology, we won. And I think that is still a conservative view that is very much present in a community that is outside the 40 that we are meeting here, or the more that we are meeting here. At the same time, from the quantum science perspective, the view is not so different. And it's, yeah, quantum in biology might be mostly at the level of a structure, but decoherence is a great deal here. Decoherence, which means how long these quantum superpositions might last in the systems, is very fast, and therefore the relevance that this might have for biology is very null. So there is that skepticism. I don't like calling skepticism, I like calling more this conservative view of the fact that the implausibility of quantum effects be relevant simply because physics is telling us in our estimates that they might not. But I think we have these unresolved issues that are challenging these conservative views. And it's the fact that we have experiments in biomolecules that are showing unforeseen interplays between these electronic and vibrational motions that we cannot explain with this conservative view fully. And we also know that in quantum science, we still don't understand very well the transition from quantum to classical. That is still a pretty much open question on the foundation of quantum mechanics. And I think an understanding of what happens in biological systems, in non-trivial quantum phenomena in biological systems, will lead us to also understand much more better what is that transition of quantum to classical. Some of my work is in this direction in this moment. I think the challenge that we face if we want to achieve this paradigm shift is that at some point, we're able to say with certainty and an ambiguity and an agreement, more or less an agreement in the community, that indeed no classical effects are needed to understand some biological processes. And at the same time, in quantum science, we will be facing then a new set of experiments and a new set of settings in which we prove and probe these non-trivial quantum phenomena. So from that perspective, the way I see this paradigm shift happening is that we are trying to understand these quantum processes in biology. We definitely want to understand this biology of the quantum domain, but we also have all of these new techniques and new experimental approaches to quantum. The question is how we can use them for biology. And I think it's in the interplay between these three different angles of the field that we might achieve that significant change and paradigm shift in the way we understand life processes at the nanoscale. Now, this is not a challenge of just one community, as you are more than aware. It's the challenge of many different communities, and it will only be by the cohesive interaction between these communities that we can achieve this challenge. Not by competition between them, not by attacks between them, but it has to be by the cooperation between them. Now, how long have I been, Greg?
So you've got about 10 more minutes, then we'll take
Great. So in the next 10 minutes, I would like to show you how I see that bridging of quantum science and biology in the area of quantum effective photosynthesis, which is where I have more experience with. So in case you are not familiar with, I'm zooming in here into a plant. I just needed to show this video because it was a very nice video. So we're zooming into a plant, the chloroplast, and we get to the thylakoid membrane when we find the photosynthetic apparatus. And indeed, all life on Earth, and it's not an understatement, relies on how these nanoscale machines work. What happens in there is that once a photon is absorbed, this is a cartoon of a biomolecule and a cartoon of a, this is a cartoon of a light harvesting antenna, and this is a cartoon of the chlorophylls that might be there, or bacterial chlorophylls. These photons are absorbed collectively by these chlorophylls, and the photons that are absorbed are different from the ones that individual chlorophylls will absorb, so there is a collective behavior in this absorption process. It creates this new electronic excitation that we call an exciton, and the energy of this is passed around until it reaches a reaction center. The majority of the people have focused on the fact that this phenomena is quite efficient. When, by this I mean that absorbing photons by these molecules, they are not very efficient, but once a photon is absorbed, the process is such that it guarantees that this energy will be kept until it starts the chemistry of the photosynthesis. You will see that as I move along in the next 10 minutes, my proposal is that we move forward from, or rather than move forward, expand our vision not just to the efficiency, but to other features of the biological transfer process here. Because quantum effects, if we just focus on the efficiency, we will get stuck as we have been. So the question is, what non-classical phenomena are relevant for this transport process? To answer that question, I'd like to bring a sentence that Albert Szent-Györgyi said, and he said that I really like it. He said, life is nothing but an electron looking for a place to rest. And with this, we wanted to highlight the importance of these redox reactions in many biological processes. But I think this sentence is incomplete, because to begin with, where did the electron get the energy from to get out of rest? So there is a sentence that I think can be added to this, and is, life requires a sophisticated handling of energy quantum. So who said this? Do you know? Just me. And it's a way to summarize what the no-classical phenomena is about. It is about this sophisticated, no-classical handling of energy quanta in these systems. We know, of course, that these systems are already using quantum mechanical phenomena at the structural level. This is a figure that I adapted from this review by Greg Scholes, and it is showing how different light harvesting antennas from different organisms have evolved to present structures and electronic and vibrational interactions such that they exploit the whole range of visible spectrum that reach Earth. And to explain why you have an absorption on this regime and on this regime, we do need, of course, quantum mechanics to understand so. But the question is, what happens after photons are absorbed with this? Because, yeah, these are the photons that are absorbed at those frequencies. What happens after photons are absorbed? And the picture that we have, and I go back to that unified principle that I said at the beginning, and at every hierarchical level in biology, we find these competitions between what we will call opposite processes. And at this level, we also see this interplay between what we will call coherent or the localizing interactions and some more, we will call it disorder, but not necessarily disorder, just too many of them and too many entangling with these electron degrees of freedom, that what they do is they localize. And this interplay between the localizing and localizing is key for understanding these non-trivial quantum effects here. So again, we go back to this picture, and this picture that applies to those levels, it applies at this level, at this energy transfer level within a single molecule. Now, if you want to see how that interplay might happen, this is a simulation that one of my PhD students did. You can play with this simulation. So I'm going to try to see if it works here. Hyperlinks harmful, yes. Let's see if this interplay, yes, I think it's working. So this is it's working here, but not there. So it's showing here, but can you help me how do I put this, that it shows the, excuse me. Hi, sorry. So when I click in the PowerPoint presentation, it goes to this one. I like this to be on the screen, please. Okay. If we can. If not, we can just move. Thank you. And can you stay here, please, because then I need to move to the PowerPoint?
Sure.
Yeah, great. So this is a simulation you can play with. It is based on the let's say, on a level of accuracy that phenomenologically shows what might be happening in these molecules in 3 different scenarios. And in the first scenario, I only have these delocalizing interactions. And at every, I'm going to call this computational experiment. Some people might diverge, but it is a computational experiment. At every computational experiment, what I am interested in is what is the transfer time from starting an excitation in this chromophore and getting it to this point under these different conditions. I ran the experiment here, and as you see, well, if I let it run for a little while, you will see that it will give me certain time here. But if I change now my conditions, and I go to a situation in which this vibrating represents the localizing interactions in the system, you see that at every time you don't have 2 of these chromophores being illuminated. This is representing the fact that it is quasi-localizing the excitation. But then you see that the transfer time, well, you didn't see, is around 0.2 picoseconds. And I run the experiment, and if I do this many times, it will give me certain average transfer time. I do the same experiment, but now under conditions in which these localizing interactions are dominating, and then the transfer time will give me something that is very long in comparison to this intermediate stage. So it's just a simulation that you can play with. It has explanations of what is happening in there. And it is to show that we believe that what is happening in these molecules sits between this regime and this regime. How exactly? We're still debating that. Can I go back, please, to the PowerPoint? I just go here, and just like that, and here. Yeah, great. Thank you very much. So this is the picture that we have. So the picture that we have at the moment is that whatever is happening, it sits between these. Mostly we know the average because most of the experiments that we've done is an ensemble molecule. We don't have the heterogeneity of how these transfer processes might be happening in these systems. These insights, more deep insights into how this process might be happening, is what two-dimensional spectroscopy is giving us. Now, I'm not going to do any detail of this because Greg Engel will talk about what we can learn from this. But what I can tell you is that there is still not an agreement in what we might learn from this. And it's important to acknowledge that there is still not that agreement, because what this is telling us is we need alternative demonstrations of the energy transfer and understanding of the energy transfer processes in these systems from different techniques. But regardless, one thing it is emerging as probably a consensual aspect in this field. And it's the fact that there is a not well understood interplay between the electronic and vibrational motions in these systems, in the excited state. And these vibrational motions are such that the energy scales of the vibrations that are involved are comparable to the energy transitions, electronic energy transitions within the system. And this energy scale matching, which I am representing here by this blue rectangle, is changing the picture of what might be happening in these systems. And that picture is such that I need to consider these vibrational motions and the quanta of energy that will excite them, and how these open transfer pathways, different transfer pathways for the energy transfer within this system. Most of my work has focused then on showing that, in the last 5 years, has focused on showing that when you have that interplay and when you have that management of a single energy quanta in this system, the nuclei motions are not as trivial as one might think, just as classical oscillators moving. You actually have truly non-classical behavior, and the techniques that I have used to show these are standard techniques from quantum optics that tells me that you have something there that you cannot explain with the conservative view of semi-classical approach to this. So you do really need truly understanding of what is truly non-classical effects in these systems. This is a work that I did with one of my PhD students, and the key thing to have in mind here is that the reason this is happening is because the vibrational motions that are involved here are well above KBT. KBT and thermal noise no longer dominates what happens in these systems. And when this happens, when these energy scales are relevant for the energy transfer, then it is not so difficult to understand that non-trivial quantum effects might be happening there. So this is a work that was done by, together with this very excellent PhD student. You can find it in this article. And for a layman description, you can find it in this Physics World News. So under this hypothesis, because we still don't have an experimental testing of this non-classicality, under this hypothesis, what we would like to understand is what is the role that these vibrations might play in the performance of these biomolecules. One approach to do this is, okay, let's imagine that we can create a photocell with these biomolecules. This tells me nothing about the biology, but it might tell me something about what these vibrations do in these systems. So several studies, this is inspired also in experimental studies that are indeed putting biomolecules and trapping with electrodes and measuring the current that comes through it. And I would like to understand how, by measuring that current, I might be able to say anything about the involvement of those vibrations and in the performance of this system. So what you find is that indeed there are situations in which those vibrations help. So this is a figure in which we computed the current for the case that you have no vibration and the case that you have vibration, and you see an improvement when you have the vibration. And there are several papers that have presented this view. But this is not the only view. It's not the standard view. It's not the general view. In my work, I wanted to show that this is not always what happens. So if you consider other light harvesting antenna or other pigment protein complexes, you actually find that the presence of those vibrations, at least in this setting, will decrease the current that you can extract from it. We scientists suffer from something that is really damaging, and is cognitive. It's a cognitive bias. Yeah, it's a confirmation bias. So whenever we see something that we like, we are only going to look for what we like, and we're going to do everything to prove what we like. But if there is one thing that biology teaches us, is that there is a heterogeneity, and we should really be careful with that confirmation bias. Because even though this might be really nice, it's not necessarily the general feature in biology. And therefore, what these studies are showing, in my opinion, is that we need to go back to the key question. And is that key question of heterogeneity in biology, directionality and improved precision, that it might be that it might not lead to an improved performance in this direction, but it might lead to some interesting aspects when it comes to these three. So I'd like just to finish by showing then, so in the previous 20 whatever minutes I have had, I have addressed how we might be able to understand these non-trivial quantum effects in these biomolecules and the place this might have in biology if we consider that unifying principle across all the hierarchical scales. But there is a different approach we can take to tame the quantum domain of biology and to see how we can affect biology there. These are two new avenues that I'm working on at the moment. And it is very clear that quantum technologies are useful to measure the biological setting with increased precision. There is a beautiful review written by Taylor in 2016 where it shows how one can use to improve measurements in a biological setting where it could be very shining lasers that are of high intensity might damage tissue, etc. But this review doesn't address what I think is more interesting, or what I think is also interesting, and is how can quantum technology affect function, not just measure, but how we can use this quantum technology to change and affect biology. I think there is one particular line of questioning in this direction, and is the fact that we can, wherever we have a system that can be activated by light, we can then shine quantum light. And that shine quantum light, by this I mean entangled photons, so photons that have correlations that we won't have in a classical light. And if we consider also optogenetics, where photoreceptors can be engineered and selectively expressed in cells, we can target processes that normally wouldn't be targeted by light but now we can activate it with light. What would be the join of this quantum light with this optogenetics to affect function? I don't know, but this is an avenue that I think is an interesting to address, one that will lead to interesting experiments, and one that I'm working on at the moment from the theoretical and in collaboration with some colleagues from the experimental viewpoint. And similar to put these molecules in cavities. So just to finish here, I like to, it wasn't meant to be 1, 1, 2, 3, 1. It was meant to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just to put forward 5 final remarks of what I think are the lessons that we are learning on this bridging of quantum science and biology. And going back to this picture, these, I think, are the challenges that we have ahead, showing that quantum technology can indeed affect biological function, proving unambiguously non-classicality in biological conditions with single molecule resolution in the biological domain, and affecting biology by manipulating that quantum domain. Thank you very much.
Christian.
I just listening about decoherence and decoherence times. So certainly for single electron wave function, the decoherence time is extremely fast. And at these energies, I don't believe there is single electron or single proton. But however, many body wave functions are very robust. The Curie temperature, the demagnetization temperature of iron is 1,000 degrees, right?
Yeah.
So I just wonder in general in this workshop if people look at many body systems and many body states, which are actually could be extremely robust to the thermal noise.
Yeah. In photosynthesis, for instance, the analogous to these many body states are the exciton states, so the collective electronic excitations. And we know that to transfer from one antenna to another one, these collective electronic states play an important role. But we don't understand very well is that if beyond determining an increased rate because of the delocalization of this, we have something else from one antenna to another one. So it is clear that, yeah, excitons and collective states and collective behavior might be robust at the level of affecting how a rate will change, but we still have that question of whether we can describe this with something more than a rate.
Sure, yeah. And also about quantum technology, here it is. I mean, biology interfering with quantum, the cell phone.
Ah, there you go.
I really liked your slide on the paradigm shift, but I do think that Christopher Longgate-Higgins had a point, that it wasn't really conservative. I mean, what he was saying was biologists have to learn more physical chemistry before they can deal with quantum mechanics. And I think that's a fair point. I mean,
yeah, I agree. This is what I say. Conservative is fair, not without. Yeah. But I do think we need to move from thinking that everything can be described here with a semi-classical approach.
But it's funny that Christopher Longgate-Higgins would be saying that, because he's the guy who, as an undergraduate, worked out the structure of diborane.
I know,
and then discovered molecular wires.
Yeah, so I know. But he has a very interesting paper that I think is much more interesting to look into, that Jordan Pascal.
Yeah. Well, I think that biology uses whatever it needs to support life.
Yeah.
And if, in fact, quantum mechanics makes a process more efficient, it's going to use it. And our job is to kind of tease apart.
Or makes a process more precise, or makes a process more heterogeneous because biology needs it.
Yeah. I just want to make one further comment, which is that the way in which enzymes work, of course, which is to give rise to these huge rate accelerations, involves properties that actually attract quantum mechanics. That is, because of the nature of the active site and how the reaction is catalyzed, quantum mechanics becomes a very natural part of what's going on.
Understand.
So I think there are different ways to approach this, and it's not, on the left or on the right side of you.
Yeah, true.
So I want to come back to your, I guess, the next slide or the previous slide where you talked about, that one. No? The one with entangled photons.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, this one. So this is something that, I've given quite a bit of thought. I think we can generate entangled photons in various portions of the optical spectrum very easily.
Yeah.
The real hard part in my mind is how do we couple those to really nanoscale structures?
Yeah.
And then how do we make measurements?
Okay.
So if you have any thoughts on that, I'd like to.
Yeah, so A lot of my inspiration for this work and moving in this direction is the work of Ted Goodson in Michigan University, who is doing two-photon absorption spectra. So far, it is clear that we can change those absorption properties with the quantum states of the light that we have here in photoreceptors. He's done it in many organic molecules and more recently in flavoproteins, which are the proteins that we can use to engineer optogenetic tools. So far, what he is showing experimentally and what we still need to understand theoretically is that sometimes we have an increased absorption cross-section of this, and this will be very good because then you can, if you have imagine you have an ensemble of molecules that you want to target, then you don't need to shine very strong light to be able to affect that ensemble of light. It's also very targeted because two-photon absorption, it's very localized, so not all the molecules will undergo this transition. So we're at that level. What we still don't have a full theoretical understanding is when you have an advantage by illuminating with two-photon absorption. My hypothesis from what is happening in these molecules is that it precisely goes to the nuclei motion. Whenever you have the nuclei motion involved in these vibronic transitions, then you will have a non-trivial interaction with this entangled light. So from the theoretical viewpoint, we still need to understand that. From the experimental viewpoint, we are already on the direction of doing these experiments in, let's say, in vivo conditions. And what they measure there is, of course, the absorption cross-section. Now, if we can measure something beyond that, I still don't know, but I think we are well in that direction.
Yeah, so I guess in that sense, a biological molecule is no different than, these similar kind of things have been done in organic systems as well.
So I think there is so the chance that is here is that it might be that those systems are just by, let's say, physical constraints, they have evolved to be described by quantum mechanics, but in the everyday life, they might not use it. But we can use quantum technologies to tame those quantum properties and affect biology.
Okay, so why don't we invite Roswitha and John Joe to set up while we take the last question from Jose.
Okay.
We'll try to be efficient here as best
Okay,
we can.
just to.
Is this my? Yeah,
She's there. Yes.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was hoping.
Yeah, sorry.
So I think we have to be, I think you said that, but I want to highlight again the difference between using quantum tools versus an effect in quantum biology. Yeah. But in the top of, and I think you clarified that, but the top of it is you can observe some quantum effects in biological systems if you look on, for example, on very fast time scales, if you go to femtoseconds or stuff like that. But to say those effects are important for biological function, it's a complete new milestone. So I think we have to be very careful, one, what's tools, what we measure, and then what we measure, is that important for the real biological function?
Yep.
And I think sometimes this stuff gets a little bit mixed up. I think you try to characterize the difference between them, but sometimes there's not a clear cut among these three different things.
Yeah, I agree. Mostly because I think we still don't have an agreement of what would be the program that you will need to follow. This is not to say the scientific method, but the program that you will need to follow to show that something is relevant for biological function. We have very different understandings. If you talk to some biologists, they will tell you function is what evolution has selected for this system. So if you want to understand biological function, you need to see what is the role of whether these quantum phenomena have been selected for in evolution. Another approach that people will say to answer this question of the function, well, at the end of the day, the function of this biomolecule or the function of enzyme is to accelerate a reaction. In here, it's just to transfer energy from one molecule to another one. So if you show that in that transfer there are quantum effects, that's enough. So I think we don't have an agreement in, at least in that question. In the other two, we might have some kind of agreement, but in that question, we don't have an agreement or an understanding of what would be the program that will allow us to say, this is relevant for biological function. And I think that's where the difficulty lies.
Well, let me say one thing. The name of this workshop,
I know.
which I made